And so would all the panelists please come up? We have Alan, Paul, and I think I've seen everybody here, so. And I think 3 of you were on the previous panel, so we will try not to cover too many of the same topics as some of you experienced before, but I'm afraid we will cover some of them. So, all right, let me, so I have to say I'm not that disappointed about the lack of a minister here, because it gives us a few extra minutes to talk about important stuff together and maybe try and solve some problems. So, so that's a good thing. But yeah, anyway, let's start with some introductions. So if we start maybe just from right to left, and everyone, if you'd like to just say a little bit about yourselves to the assembled company, we can get started.
Okay, thanks a lot, Neil. I'm Siddharth Kaski. I'm a principal engineer at Warwick Manufacturing Group, University of Warwick. I lead the research at Warwick around testing of connected autonomous vehicles and leading some of the CCAP-funded projects also. I also represent the UK on the ISO committees for intelligent transportation system.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Alan Banks. I'm the chairman of ASIN. I've been chairman for 6 years. I recently retired from the automotive industry after 35 years, spent the first half of my career with Ford Motor Company, second half of my career with Visteon, which is a tier 1 in the automotive space. So I'm not a semiconductor guy, I'm an automotive guy. I sit on the UK Automotive Council, both on the technical level representing power electronics, but also on the intelligent and connected vehicle sub-team. So that's me.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Isabel Bescos, and I'm an investor at Balderton Capital. We are a European venture capital fund. We invest in early stage companies, and we've been around for a while, since 2000. We have about $2.5 billion under management and work with 80 companies in our portfolio. And within Balderton, we do both mobility and sort of clean tech investments. I work on a lot of those. And in the past, I was head of strategy at BlaBlaCar, which is a French tech unicorn doing sort of large-scale carpooling, transporting more people today actually than British Airways, which is why I'm here.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm chair of Power Electronics UK within TechWorks. My day job is I am advisor to the board of CRRC Times Electric, which you may not have heard of, but is probably one of the largest tier 1 suppliers into the railway rolling stock business, and is located in China. And up until 2 years ago, I was the chief executive of Dynix Semiconductor, which has had a very long relationship with TechWorks and its predecessor named under NMI. Very pleased to be here and joining in with this panel.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Matt Boyle. Up until a year ago, I was the chief exec of Sevcon until it was bought by Borg Warner. Sevcon's main raison d'etre was the development, manufacture and support of drives for hybrid and pure electric vehicles. As I said, I sold it to Borg Warner, successfully retiring. Retirement is overdone as an occupation. I've been busier than ever. And recently I was involved in, with a group of amazing people, developing the Stevenson Challenge, which was ultimately successful.
We're talking about a lot, I think. So, right, so I think we collectively would like to thank Gary and TechWorks for us being here, and thank you for your time in the next 25 minutes. Thank you, Gary, especially because I think I'm, in one way, uniquely unqualified to be here. So I am very passionate about automotive technology, and I realized just how passionate I was when I gave up my W-Reg Audi A4 6 months ago. So I miss her dearly. So I miss the handling. She and I handled as one. I could get around the Chiswick roundabout and go from the outside lane to the inside lane. It kind of did it itself. She did it herself. I miss the seat, because after 20 years, the seat and my derriere were sort of the same shape, so I could just sit it. But most of all, I miss the tape deck. It still had a tape deck. And Siddhartha, if you don't know what a tape deck is, I'll draw you a diagram after. Okay. Siddhartha has been named the one of the top 30 under 30 influencers by Ford. And so you may not know what a tape deck is, but boy, do I miss that tape deck. So I brought 30 tapes over from Canada when I was 25, so 25 years ago. 29 of them were still working. in my car. Now they just sit in the basement. So anyway, I miss those. So I am passionate about automotive technology, but in the wrong direction. So I'm looking at the past, and we're all here looking at the future. So I am kind of unqualified to be here, but what everyone in this room and everyone on this panel will refer to is skills. And so I think I'm, in some ways in the UK, uniquely qualified to talk about that, because I started a high-tech semiconductor recruitment company 20 years ago in the UK. We've now grown to cover the entire technology landscape, from semiconductors up to UX and web developers and everyone in between. And we're 80 people with offices across Europe, in China and the US. And we're turning over about 25 to 30 million if you include contract turnover, which is a bit of a misnomer. But anyway, so I've seen the macro and the micro trends in skills. And after, what we'll do is we'll probably have 5 minutes at the end where we can talk about some of those things. However, when Gary asked me to participate in the panel, he said two things. So opportunities. We're here to talk about opportunities. So I think opportunities come from problems and weaknesses. So tonight, let's celebrate all our previous successes, but today, maybe on the panel, let's talk about where we can improve. And secondly, he said it's about the UK industrial strategy. So I looked up UK industrial strategy, and there are 5 pillars of the UK industrial strategy, and we have 5 pillars of the community in front of us. So I thought we should link those up and give everyone a topic, and all the topics sort of fit into their expertise. So I'm just going to go in order that they appear on the UK Industrial Strategy website. I'm going to start with Alan, and on the topic of ideas and innovation. So we're in an incredibly rapidly evolving automotive and clean energy space. Where are our strengths and weaknesses in becoming innovative? And where, I guess, weaknesses, again, let's talk about the strengths, but let's focus on the weaknesses.
Okay. You're absolutely right. The automotive industry is going through unprecedented change, and for those of you that attended the previous session would have listened to me talking about the 12 challenges that we face in automotive, particularly in the space of connected and autonomous vehicles as we're moving forward. In terms of strengths, I think the first thing I'd like to say is one of the biggest strengths we have in the UK is that the government is 100% behind us. We're getting full support from the government in terms of the support they give for connected and autonomous vehicles, because they've set up a centre, which is the Centre for Connected and Autonomous Vehicles, CCAV, headed up by Ian Forbes. And Ian has engaged with us very, very well. So I would say that with CCAV in place and Innovate UK in place for the funding and the calls that are coming out, which are all very relevant to what we're doing, we have a strength in the UK in terms of the support that we get from our government in terms of moving this space forward. In terms of some of the challenges that we face, most of them are around, obviously, the development of electronics, and there's 2 primary areas which are growing. One is in the growth of power electronics, and we have a tremendous strength in the UK in terms of the capability of the companies that we have that can support power electronics, both in the automotive space, but also in adjacent industries. And one of the things that we're seeing is a collaboration now of those groups coming together. So we're talking that some of the challenges that are faced by the automotive industry are not unique. They're the same challenges that are being faced by some of the other industries, but on maybe a different scale. But some of the technologies that are required and some of the new invention that's required is the same. So some of the silicon technologies that are required in terms of supporting higher power and high temperature deployment inside vehicles is the same in trains, planes, and other applications in power generation and so on. So there's a lot of collaboration going on, which is another strength. If I think about some of the weaknesses, one of the challenges that we face in the growth as we move from level 3 to level 4 autonomy, the amount of computing power that's required in the vehicle just goes up exponentially. So the demand on the silicon is absolutely huge. But there's also a massive demand in terms of requirements for artificial intelligence and computing. And one of the biggest areas which we lack, particularly in automotive, is the skills around software and the ability to do validation and verification of that software. Gary put a slide up earlier that says London is the third best place technology group. I would agree with that. The issue that I have in my industry is that all the software developers are in the wrong place. They're all sitting in Canary Wharf looking after financial systems, so they're all in fintech. And what I need is those guys coming across and somehow being made available to the automotive space. So one of the challenges I have is how do we make automotive, particularly electronics and software development, an attractive place to come and work. So that's certainly one of the challenges that we face. The other sort of areas of weakness, I think, is just the scale of our OEMs. In terms of the major OEMs that we have in the UK, Ford and Nissan are there of scale, but they're not headquartered here in the UK. They're headquartered outside of the UK. So a lot of the research and development money that goes into those companies is being dictated outside of the UK. And where we have the UK automotive companies, so like Jaguar Land Rover, Nissan, so McLaren, and Williams and Lotus and so on, they're either very small scale or almost niche. I mean, Jaguar Land Rover is fantastic, headquartered here, doing some great stuff, but in terms of scale, they're only 500,000 units a year, which if you compare that to some of the other companies, it's very, very small. So it's very hard to get traction and scale in the UK for some of the initiatives that we're working on. So that's kind of one of the areas.
And is the solution to that to potentially cross into other industries like aerospace, et cetera? Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, one of the really good things about the ASIN group is that because we're not just got membership from automotive, we've got some good cross-sector groups. And I'll call out Roke, for example. I mean, Roke do a tremendous amount of work in the defence space, and have done an awful lot of work in artificial intelligence in defence. But it's been a very specific environment where that's been deployed. They now have that skill set that they're trying to make available to us in the automotive industry. So I welcome that, and there's lots of things that we can learn. So one of the biggest strengths that we have in this group, and this is where TechWorks is so good, is the collaboration and the cross-sector working. And we can learn from each other, because the automotive industry can't do this on its own. I said in my speech earlier that the vehicle is no longer an island. For the last 100 years, the vehicle was developed as a standalone thing that ran around on four wheels, and as long as it worked in its own environment, it was fine. But now it's connected to other vehicles, it's connected to the infrastructure, it's part of a much bigger ecosystem, and the OEMs and the tier ones can no longer develop the vehicles of the future on their own. They need to be collaborating with others.
Okay, thank you. Right, now Siddhartha has perhaps the most important job on the planet, which is that he is heading up verification and validation of autonomous vehicle systems. So he is testing to make sure they're safe enough for us to drive them. So he's in charge. So if you ever have a problem in the future, talk to him. But Siddhartha, so the second pillar of the strategy is ensuring good jobs and earning power for the country as a whole. I guess that means people coming through the system. So you are uniquely placed with your educational background to talk about some of the weaknesses that we might have in the UK.
Okay,
go ahead.
Thanks, Neil. I think when I was asked to sit on this panel, I wanted to drive some of my experiences from India and then in Germany and then now in the UK. So I graduated from India in mechanical engineering, spent some time in the industry in India, then spent 3.5 years in Germany, again in the industrial automotive sector, and then did a PhD at Warwick. And I tend to find some similar challenges across all these countries, but the root cause is very different. So the similar challenge is that we don't have the skill set we need in the industrial workforce. But if you compare India to the UK, we have loads and loads of engineers in India, and we have very less engineers in the UK. The issue with India is we don't have enough the right skills in the workforce. The issue in the UK is not enough people are going into the engineering as a degree in the universities. So a lot of the focus in the UK has been on inspiring the next generation on the schools. But when you talk about connected and autonomous vehicles, the industry that I'm right now, I still think there's an issue in the university curriculum in the UK also. Even though we have some of the best universities across the world, some in the top 10, we don't have the right skills in the graduates that are coming across the university. And when I say that is, I'm right now recruiting for a lot of the Innovate UK projects that we have won, and I can't find a systems engineering expert coming out of the university education system in the UK right now. We have brilliant software people, we have brilliant mechanical engineers, we are electrical engineers, but we are looking at things like connected autonomous vehicles, we're looking at systems engineers, and that's what we are lacking across. So a lot of focus is on the school children and inspiring them into the next generation. That's a strength for us, but we should not stop focusing on revamping the university curriculum also. That's something India is doing, that's something UK should also do. India is doing for some very other reasons, but UK should, if it wants to pitch itself at the forefront of the connected autonomous vehicle landscape, competing with Japan, China, and US, it's something that it has to focus very quickly. One of the other things I also would like to raise, comparing from my experience in Germany, there's a lot more focus in Germany put on applied learning. In universities, people take a year off just working in the industry as a part of their bachelor's or a diploma, what they call, or the master's degree. That's something that's not there in the UK. I don't know why, because it's so valuable. When you talk to a German engineer, just finished his diploma, you can see the difference in that engineer and engineers coming across in different countries. I'm not saying UK or India, it's anywhere else. I found that as a very interesting and a very unique difference in engineers coming out of university from Germany and from other countries. And I think if we need to focus a bit more on the applied side of it. It's very good to have the theoretical foundations, very strong foundations, but these days we need the applied skills to venture into the industry. Otherwise, the industry has to invest around 12 months to 18 month graduate training program just to reskill them to make them employable, which I think not many industries are willing to do.
There is a solution for that out there. And if you have an electronics team of any size, I think Jeremy, are you here from Embacosm?
I'm at the back here.
Yeah. How big's your company? 15, and you're part of the UKSF scheme? Yeah, so Jeremy sponsors a grad, and what the UKSF scheme, scholarship scheme does is exactly what Siddhartha's just said. It gets students, anyone who's experienced this knows this, but it gets students into your company for either a sandwich year or a summer placement or two. It gets them the training, but actually it gets you the input from those students. We'll talk about this tonight at the dinner, but essentially, if you have an electronics team in your company and you are not linked up with the UKSF, you are missing out on a major asset. So speak to Stu afterwards if you're in that position. So, right now, Paul, driving major upgrade to UK infrastructure. Now you sort of referred to this earlier in your panel, that infrastructure is not the electricity network. So let's change our perception of the word infrastructure a little bit to include maybe anything from smart cities to ecosystems. But we're talking about connected autonomous vehicles. And do we have the infrastructure at the moment to integrate those? And I know that you're interested in more than just cars. Essentially it's the transport system.
Yes, that's right. So I mean, my company, the company I work for now, is probably one of the largest railway rolling stock manufacturers in the world, and so we know a little bit about the railway system and what the needs are of that, and also where it's headed in the future. And from our viewpoint, yes, I mean, it is one infrastructure. It's a transport infrastructure, and what you can't do now is to really segregate that down into road and rail, because the two are becoming connected in a big way. So if you think about freight or passengers, the key thing is that when they get to the station or to the goods depot, they probably have to move onto the road. And when they move onto the road, they have to also go to their destination. And so that whole business about transport becomes one big infrastructure, and it's connected. The other thing I'd say is that you cannot sort of separate with a car. You can't separate the car from the roads, no more than you can separate the train from the track. And the track includes the stations, it includes all the tunnels it goes through, it includes the bridges it goes over. So it's a massive, big infrastructure. Now, one thing which is very interesting was that when I started to, and in the past couple of years, I've been exploring what the UK has been doing in terms of its innovation in rail, and there's been a big focus on that right now because there's a big interest in high speed too. But what I found is that actually the focus there is not initially has not been in what I'd call our sector. It's not really been in electronics and that sector. It's really been in the track and the bridges and the stations and the wheels and all the mechanics of the system. And that seems to be because perhaps the government doesn't understand what it's all about. Because first of all, they think, well, you know, we need a high-speed train, therefore we need to have a high-speed track and we need to have high-speed platforms and big stations and things like this. But what they didn't understand was that the key issue is what you're actually going to run on that track. You know, how is the vehicle itself being powered? How is it communicating? Because everything is connected. You know, in China, we build the rail with the train, and the two go together, and one cannot be separated from the other. And that's something which I think has been lost. So when I challenged the fact that we were only investing in the issue of what I call the track or the wheels or the tunnels, they said, well, we're going to get around to the rest of it, get around to it, you know. So what does that mean? They said, well, in a few years' time, we'll think about it. Now, I mean, that's a mentality which we cannot have. So what you need to do is to think about everything from day one. So as we're beginning to do now with the electric vehicle, okay, with the electric vehicle, we're thinking the electric vehicle is a complete system. It needs a battery. It needs power electronics to convert the power from the battery into something that can drive the motor. Then you need the power electronics also to power all the infrastructure within the vehicle, such as the communications infrastructure. Everything needs to be connected with sensors so we know what's going on. All these things are becoming connected, and that's really is the key thing we need to focus on in the future, not do a little bit at a time, but connect all of these things into what I call one big infrastructure. That's what I think is really what we're about with infrastructure. So right now, the car cannot be disconnected from the grid. And the car and the grid cannot be disconnected from the road or from the city or from the energy supply. Everything is interconnected. And that's, I think, a strength that we can bring within the UK. And I touched on it briefly in the previous panel session. And I believe that's really where, within the environment that we have right now of these connected communities within TechWorks, we have that opportunity to build on that, to get the right people working together. So I'm by trade. You know, I began in the semiconductor business, and I was listed as being a material scientist. So that sort of tells you what people thought about semiconductors or semiconductors that applied in our industry. But I very rapidly, because I was really trained as an electronics engineer, so I adapted that, and now I'm moving up a little bit. So that having been focused very much on power electronics and power semiconductors and developing those, as a supplier in that industry, we understood what cross-sector meant, because you could not just produce one component for automotive or one component for rail or one component for energy. It had to meet all of those customers' requirements. So I think there's a lot of people in the room in that same situation. You are suppliers to sectors, and you know what all those individual sectors need. So there's a great opportunity to make your products and your technology multi-sector. And by becoming multi-sector, it satisfies the demand of what I'm talking about of the total infrastructure. So that's where electronics and power and data and software all starts to come together in a big, big way. So that's really is the opportunity to get the real infrastructure that we need in this country and to become a leader in that area. And believe me, the Chinese don't have it right yet either. I mean, you know, they are also in boxes. You know, so you have the state responsible for energy, the state grid is responsible for energy. You have the state organisation responsible for transport, railways, and then you have the automotive, which is separate. And then, I don't know where semiconductor fits. It's somewhere in amongst all that lot. So
that's where
they're operating in boxes, you know.
That's TechWorks' opportunity, and so really TechWorks is, I think, Gary probably, Hussein, we're probably just at the beginning of a journey. So this is the one place for those kind of that kind of interaction and that sort of joined up thinking to happen. I think it's the unique place in the UK that exists for that to happen. So, so Isabel, business and the pillar is creating a business environment to start and grow a business. So looking at it from a VC perspective, where is there a weakness in the sort of funding chain from very early stage to, and if you explain where you come in the chain as well, that would be good. Is there a weakness for companies that's hampering companies' growth?
Yeah. So First of all, from a VC perspective, I guess we've sort of at a very interesting point where, in order to start a mobility company or a clean tech company, you don't need to reinvent the grid, and you don't need to invest, millions in sort of in infrastructure or hardware, or you can sort of, a lot of the companies we see, they actually process the underlying data in sort of very innovative ways, and therefore offer, either through like autonomous vehicles or sort of through, for instance, microgrids, they offer an opportunity, a business opportunity to sort of attack those sectors differently. And if I think of sort of those, those two sectors, the thing you need to start a business, in essence, is what we've been saying, right, which is like talent and funding. And actually, I think Gary stole my stat there, because I wanted to say exactly the same thing. The UK still has nearly twice the amount of computer scientists as compared to the next biggest country in Europe, which is France. And so, historically, we sort of built a very strong community of talent that's been working on these problems. And then from a funding perspective, most of, very many actually of Europe's biggest venture capital funds are sitting in London, and there's been, so historically, there's been a lot of money going into London. And so to come back to your question, we've actually, independently of sort of stage, whether it's very early stage and raising about $1 million or to up to a few millions, onto the sort of like the really high growth rounds of 100 million plus, we've seen this very interesting phenomena where corporates are looking to have started raising their own venture arm. And so we're talking about funds of roughly sort of 100 million, maybe more. We're talking of a few evergreen funds, so funds that are actually not linked to any timelines and can invest in companies that take slightly longer. And to give you a few examples, BMW, they have their iVentures team, and then Jaguar has the InMotion venture arm team. I know British Gas less, but they have a venture arm team as well. And so they've sort of been looking into how can we bridge, especially sort of the deep tech part of things, how can we fund that and sort of strive away from the typical timelines that VCs are linked to. So that's sort of been an interesting phenomenon.
I think that's the big opportunity for the next
in part,
number
yeah,
of years.
So
is that the corporate ventures getting involved, which I think historically we've been weak at in terms of creating those links. I don't know.
Well, and traditional VCs will actually keep doing a big chunk of it, right? It's just that the outliers that historically didn't fit in as much, they now have different options. If we sort of think of the world's largest VCs, they still fund a lot of, they have sort of pockets allocated to deep tech, clean tech. They will keep funding this as well.
Yeah. All right, finally, Matt, places and prosperous communities. So Gary already referred to this. My question was going to be, should we worry about places and prosperous communities, or should we annex Bristol and turn it into a mega hub? But yeah, you've been all over the country and the world, so what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's an interesting conundrum, really. I didn't see Newcastle anywhere on your list, by the way.
It wasn't my list, it was Gary's list.
Yeah, it's Gary's list. I didn't see Newcastle on it anywhere. I think, for me, and talking to the investing public, especially in the United States, the issues of where can you find the talent was often the question asked. Not does the talent exist, how much is it going to cost? It was where is it? Because when you look at the traditional tier 1 through N model in automotive, it's historical. I can't imagine what the write-off of the diesel tooling bill for BMW is going to be, but it's going to be substantial. So these businesses are all looking for where does the talent exist. So in our particular space, it was, and wait for it, northern Italy, the northeast of England, and the east coast of the United States. And people would go, really? And it's historical. It is historical. A great deal of investment was put in after the Second World War in reinvigorating the north of Italy, and power electronics and drives and machines were a great part of that equation. The company that I ran was set up in the 1950s by somebody who, wait for it, produced the power electronics for milk floats. And that's where Sevcon's technology actually started, milk floats. And then the east coast of the United States, there have traditionally been, for power, there have traditionally been a lot of academics in that region who have generated an ecosystem that's continued to generate people for National Grid, for example. National Grid's US R&D centres there. So prosperous people require prosperous jobs. I was saying to the panel earlier on, what a great time to be an engineer, especially in power electronics. 31-year-olds earning 70 grand a year. That's the sort of scarcity that generates an enormous amount of reward if the demand continues to rise. I'm working with 5 or 6 businesses at the moment, looking around the world for talent. Northern Italy, northeast of England, east coast of the United States. Those places in themselves are beginning to recognise that with the critical mass that they've got, if they continue to invest in it, then it will burgeon and they will benefit from that type. The rates of return on some of these investments are triple digits. It doesn't take a genius. There is one thing though that actually in one of Gary's other slides, it's not a problem, but it's just a failure of the ecosystem, and that is in the northeast of England there was one company designing and developing drives. There's now 3 or 4, but when I started there was only one, and therefore it makes it very difficult to attract young talent to that area because they can't move around. It's been resolved in the northeast of the United States, a great deal of investment going on there, and in northern Italy, but not yet in the UK. And I think the last thing for me is I'm doing what I'm doing for my kids and my grandkids. The world is going to have to electrify. The opportunity is enormous. And if we get our act together and we collaborate, I think we can generate in really, really nice places for people to live, work, and develop. And I'm very positive about it. So I'm sorry I can't give you a negative, really.
No, that's so we should be. Yeah, no, the thing is, the time is great, the opportunities are out of this world, but ultimately, as everybody for the last 5 years has been saying, it comes down to the skills coming through that are going to allow us to do that. So on that specific note, any comments or questions from the audience? And also, Gary, how are we doing for time?
Almost up.
All right, okay, so on the skills front, any questions, comments, suggestions that we as a community can do together, which I'll make one in a minute, but are there any from the floor? Jeremy.
Thank you. I saw partly alluded this in the ESIN. I think we need to recognise the value of engineers, and I think when Matt talked about 70,000 for 31-year-olds, you're in the wrong league for the top end of software engineering. There was a report earlier this year, which came up at the GSA, that if you've got a master's degree in AI in Silicon Valley, you start on 300,000. Now, I think you do have to ask how many digits are in the salary if you want to keep your software engineers, and recognise that the top lawyers in London earn £5 million a year. There are more top lawyers than there are specialist compiler engineers in the world. So why do specialist compiler engineers not earn 5 million a year? And actually, we started worrying, you know, is it 70,000 or 300,000? So I think there's a bit of a reset needed in this scarcity market if you want to get software engineers. And actually, that's an elephant in the room that people are unwilling to discuss. You actually need to look at bench engineers. If you want really good ones and you want them to come to you and not go to banking, you're going to have to pay them a lot more.
That is starting to happen. But there is all, you know, Facebook and Amazon and Google, they're all coming here as well. So it's something that I don't think the profit margins that are available allow that to happen in too many cases. And that's a part of reality that we kind of have to accept, I think. But at the same time, if the profit margins do start going up because of these opportunities, there does seem to be a reticence on the part of big and small companies to recognize the value of those engineers to their bottom line and therefore compensate them. So there is, you know, we can push from the bottom, but there is going to be a certain pull from the top that we can't do anything about. Well, we can do one thing about, but I'll mention that in a minute. Anybody else? Down here in the corner?
Richard Marshall. So I guess one of the questions I have is, we've talked about IoT, we've talked about hardware, but we come back to the finance element, which is, as somebody who's been through a startup which was largely funded by American money, and historically, and I'm being careful what I say, against, we have a VC in the room,
More than one.
but you know, historically, Europe, certainly European venture capital funds have not, you know, they have not tended to want to fund anything to do with hardware. So, you know, immediately there's the comment, yep, you want to do data analytics, you want to do anything like that, sure, yep, here's the money. But still, historically, one of the major problems for most, particularly hardware startups, is that you can't just do it with PowerPoint. You've actually got to often go and build a proof of concept, and that costs money, if only to better get customer fit. So I guess one of my comments is that still, you know, it's different from being in the valley. If you're in the valley, there's an awful lot of money there with funds that have the knowledge and the experience of what it takes to take a hardware company, you know, to scale. But that's, and I'd love to be proven wrong, but that for me is still an area that Europe needs to look at if it's to remain globally competitive.
Comments?
Yeah, I would just add to that. So within Europe, there are certainly some funds who do that. So Amadeus Capital, for instance, in Cambridge, they do a lot of hardware as well. But in essence, it's very much linked to sort of the size of the fund, the timelines of the fund, et cetera, et cetera. So I would not, I would just in that case recommend to sort of strive for the right funds, and there are many that won't do, but there are certainly some that will do. And historically, there have always been. That would be my only comment.
A few years ago now, I had a cause to go around London with the story of Sevcon. My experience wasn't particularly pleasant because I discovered quite quickly that venture capital wants a slam dunk. And if you're building hardware, it's anything but a slam dunk. The thing, though, that changed in the messaging was we stopped talking about the product and start talking about the application and the problem it was trying to solve. And that got some VCs animated because they don't get volts and amps. They don't get, you know, switch reluctance versus PMAC. They don't get that. But what they do get is you can make that McLaren P570S do 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds rather than 3.5 seconds. They get that. So we were somewhat successful when we changed the message and changed the ask. But I agree with you. It's no easy job getting money out of London,
Okay.
unfortunately.
Right, we need to move on to the next panel, so there'll be opportunities to make comments. One thing, we've been talking about government a lot. The Migration Advisory Committee has just come out with a report, some of you will know this, saying get rid of the cap on visas. So I just wanted to explain the macro situation very quickly to you. The government still thinks that the UK is sort of this beacon for the rest of the world to come and work here. It ain't anymore, folks. The last 9 Indian engineers we've had on interview have all declined offers in the UK because they've looked at their cost and quality of life at home, compared it against the UK, they've opted for home. And that has gone from maybe 5 out of 6 coming to the UK 2 or 3 years ago to 0 out of 9 out of the last 9. So we are in a global cat fight for skills. If we can get a software or a hardware engineer here from any country, we've got to be doing that if we're going to compete. It's as simple as that. The government has a cap on visas, and they charge your company a massive premium for the right to bring somebody into this country to work here and pay taxes. No matter what they say about Stevenson and all that stuff, it's wonderful, but they are cutting the knees out from this industry. I promise you that. Does anyone disagree with me at this point? If you don't, then please get the message out. Every time you speak to someone of influence, get that message out. And Gary, let's get some kind of collective message together and get these people signing letters and et cetera, but that is the #1 challenge to our industry, in my opinion. So something to address. So first of all, thank you very much to our 5 pillars of the community. Please put your hands together.